Thank you. My name is Stacy. I live in Logan County, Ohio, where the wind industry first attempted to build an industrial wind facility. And I had seen a few of them as I drove across the Pennsylvania Turnpike on business a few years earlier. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is that thing? And, you know, when I found out they were considering building that near where I lived, I thought, well, that's kind of unfortunate because I live in a really hilly, really pretty part of western Ohio near Bellefontaine. And, you know, but if it's gonna get us energy independent, reduce our consumption of oil and so forth, I guess we'll just have to be patriotic and go with it. But being curious and a natural skeptic, because of the business that I've been in, I started doing some research, and I tried to be very fair about that, and I had a whole lot of trouble verifying the positive claims about wind electricity, and all kinds of experts from all kinds of disciplines who were unanimous in saying, well, this really doesn't make sense. So I decided I would become better acquainted with my community by helping to lead a fight to try to stop the project, and ultimately it was not built. I don't know to what degree our efforts had to do with that, but we worked very hard at it. And then I was called a NIMBY in several newspapers, not in my backyard, and you know, that Tom really only cared about what was going on in the southeast part of Logan County, Ohio. And I didn't like that much because I didn't think that was true. So I started reaching out to places where other wind projects were being proposed in the state, and trying to pass on what I had learned through the process of fighting the project to other areas, Champaign County, and Auglaize County, Shelby County, and Crawford, and Richland counties, and so forth. And it got to be sort of a full-time hobby for me at that point. So that's my background. If you want to know anything more about my credentials, you can ask later. I'm going to divide up this presentation into three parts. I'm going to discuss why wind energy is high in total cost, and that you may not see that, and basically make a counter-argument to what the industry says about the cost of wind electricity. I'm going to show why wind energy is low in real value, which is different than cost, right? You know, a Snickers bar costs less than a ribeye steak, but the nutritional value is different, so you can't really compare them on price. And then finally, how wind energy drives electricity rates higher, even though the cost of electricity that's sold onto the grid isn't really higher than average, or not much higher. So the first section, wind electricity is high in total cost. The typical 2 megawatt machine is going to run about 30% of its theoretical maximum output over the course of an 8,760-hour year. And the wholesale clearing price, the average wholesale clearing price for electricity in this part of the country is most recently reported as $35.23 per megawatt hour. That's 1,000 kilowatt hours, so that's 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour for those who are keeping track against their electricity bill at home. So the earned income from one of these 2 megawatt machines is approximately $185,000 per year. And that's not enough on its own for wind electricity to be profitable. And how do we know that? You can see our grid operator here, PJM, has divided up the costs or the value areas of energy sales, electricity sales at wholesale level. And wind energy basically doesn't come with any of these other costs. Its main product is the energy component, as opposed to the reliability component and some of the other ancillary services that are available. So that $35.23 up there talking about. So, okay, so how do they make money? Well, $185,000 per machine over a 20-year life, that's only $3.7 million of lifetime sales revenue. But the machine costs $4 million when you build it. You didn't ever make your money back. And that's even before operations costs, maintenance costs, decommissioning costs, their taxes, and profit. So where's the money coming from? As it turns out, earned income makes up only about 37%, about a third of the total revenue that these projects enjoy and get to enjoy on their bottom line. So put another way, for every $10 they earn, they're given through the government, our tax dollars basically, another $20. So that would be very nice. I think everybody would really appreciate that if the government would triple our salary for us, right? But that does make wind energy profitable in Ohio. How do we know about this? Here's a letter written from staff to President Obama back in 2010 regarding the subsidy programs at the federal level and state level here. And you can see at the bottom it says, the government would provide a significant subsidy, 65+%. While the sponsor would provide little skin in the game, equity of about 10%. The other 25% there, we assume would be debt, borrowed from banks, bond issues, that sort of thing. Okay, so here's how that breaks down. The first one is your $185,000 from actually earning money for producing and selling electricity. They have a federal tax credit for each machine worth about $90,000 a year. A special depreciation scheme that other industries do not enjoy, that in itself is worth $37,000 a year per machine. There's a federal loan guarantee program. You can read these. The state and regional REC stands for Renewable Energy Certificate, and it's a way that the state keeps track of whether or not utilities are fulfilling their mandate for these named special so-called green electricity sources that we're required to consume. So there's a certificate, kind of like a form of a currency, sort of a fake currency, that says, yeah, if you produced a megawatt hour of wind energy, you get one renewable energy certificate. Then those are ultimately tradable between producers and utilities, retail utilities, and ultimately turned into the state. And that's their value on a per machine basis every year, based on the most recent year reported. So how does wind stack up compared to other energy subsidies in dollars per megawatt hour? Now the wind industry will say, well, we've been subsidized far less than coal, far less than natural gas, far less than oil, far less than nuclear. Well, fine, but you're only producing a couple percent of our electricity, and you've only been doing it for a few years. So they want to put it in total dollars to make it look like they deserve a lot more subsidy. The real metric that needs to be considered here is dollars per unit of benefit, per unit of energy that's produced. So you can see the ratio there. That's just a restatement graphically what I was talking about earlier, only this is on a per megawatt hour basis instead of on a per machine per year basis. Now, if you take a current snapshot of the subsidy pictures for wind energy, the federal production tax credits expired at the end of last year. Okay, so they're not, any project that's built right now may not get that. You know, there are some caveats in IRS law that, they might be able to get it if they can prove that they spent some money before the thing expired, before the tax credit expired. That's a tax credit that was put in place in 1992. Okay, it was supposed to be a temporary thing to help the industry get on its feet. Also, the requirement for renewable electricity produced within Ohio's borders has been repealed in Senate Bill 210 at the state level. Initially, the laws said you you must produce more and more renewable electricity year after year, and half of that must be produced within the state borders of Ohio. Well, you know, there was a Supreme Court justice who was hearing a case in Michigan, I believe. Was it Michigan? It was in Illinois. Who indicated in his comments about this electricity case that, you know, it's illegal for a state to say, well, you're not allowed, you can't, you have to buy something produced inside my state, you're not allowed to buy it from an adjacent state. There's something called the Interstate Commerce Clause that the federal, part of the federal system that says, you know, states have to be allowed to compete with each other. They can't protect themselves from competition from other states. So it was seen that perhaps there would be a challenge on federal constitutional grounds at some point, saying, you know, you can't say half of your renewable electricity has to come from within Ohio's borders. That's one reason, perhaps, that section of our law was repealed this past spring and went into effect about a week ago. Also, siting rules have changed for these machines. Now machine locations are required to be measured from your property lines and not your house. That's the minimum standard now. Now that's a snapshot in time, but we also have to consider that the federal PTC has expired 8 times since 1992 and has always been reinstated retroactively to the date of expiry. So will that happen again? It might, or some other federal subsidy might replace it. As far as the in-state requirement for renewable electricity, well, that's fine. That sort of reduces some of the income that these companies get but didn't earn. But there are still states east and south of Ohio that have escalating mandates that Ohio might end up being the best place for one of these wind projects to be built to fill a mandate in Pennsylvania or Virginia. So just because we've abolished the requirement that wind energy produced in Ohio is not a requirement anymore, doesn't mean there won't ever be wind energy built in Ohio ever again. And of course, for the Greenwich project, the new siting rules did not apply because the application that the developer put into the Ohio Power Siting Board was before these laws changed, so they're grandfathered in under the old rules. So next, wind electricity is low in real value. Let's go through this real quickly. You can see here is a page from the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration, and they're talking about here coal-fired electric plants that are coal plants that are going to be retiring. So it's interesting that the reason I put this slide up here is you can see it says net summer, See, it says net summer capacity retiring. And I just wanted to point out that net summer capacity is important. The wind industry would talk about their product in terms of enough energy to power a certain number of homes from this wind project. Well, that's not a genuine true statement. Wind electricity by itself cannot power a modern normal household because electricity from a wind turbine alone, you can't store it, and you would have to be using electricity more when the wind blew more and less when the wind blew less, and not at all when the wind wasn't blowing at all. So that statement isn't true, but it's something that's a better measure of an electricity project is what do you do for me at the very highest electricity demand hours of the year, which happen to be hot summer weekday afternoons when all of the manufacturing companies are in operation, everyone's air conditioning is running. That's the tough time of the year. And you can see here in PJM, or regional grid, what happens in June, July, and August. And it's over 10% more electricity than any other time of the year. So if you're going to build a new electricity project, it darn well better be producing at those times, right? Well, here's how wind produces. Each of these squiggly lines is a month of the year. I don't know if you can read those over there, but July and August are onto the blue and orange lines there. And across the bottom axis is the hour of the day. So noon is halfway across, 6 p.m. is 3/4 of the way across. And you can see on hot summer afternoons, July and August, wind electricity is producing far, far less than it produces at any other time of the year. Well, let's go back a slide. Do you think we have a shortage of electric generating plants at some other time of the year? We don't. The only time we might have a shortage is in June, July, and August. So there's a real mismatch between this energy resource and when we need additional electricity. That's why the Department of Energy uses the term summer capacity, as opposed to nameplate capacity or the amount of energy generated over a year, anything like that. Okay, so here's the question. Essentially, when you look at the statistics, you can be 90% certain that a wind electricity project will produce more than 5% of its nameplate at any peak hour of the year. But if you want to be more certain than 9 out of 10 times, which the electricity grid does want to be more certain than that number drops off to close to 0. So the question is, what guaranteed minimum output is a wind project going to give you on a hot summer afternoon? And the answer is it's very near 0. So that leads to the question that if wind cannot replace the need to build and maintain dispatchable power plants, what can it replace? And by dispatchable power plants, we're talking about things where the grid operator can call up and say, hey, we're running short on electricity this afternoon, it's really hot out there, turn on your plant, even though it's expensive to do so, we need that electricity. That's dispatchable. Wind isn't that way because you don't have control over the fuel. If there's no fuel, there's not going to be any electricity. So if wind can't replace the need to build and maintain a certain number of dispatchable power plants so that we don't have blackouts on hot summer afternoons, what can it replace? And the answer to that is wind can replace about 1/3 of the fuel that those plants would otherwise consume. So that leads to the question then, what is that fuel savings worth compared to the full cost of wind electricity? Okay? We know wind electricity plants don't replace dependable power plants. They can save some fuel. So what's that fuel worth? This is a slide also from the Department of Energy, Information Administration, and it might be hard to read, but coal's clear on the left, nuclear's there in the middle. Anybody having trouble reading that? Can you see the difference in colors between blue and green? The key here is that the blue, this is electricity cost over the life of these projects. So whether that be 40, 50, 60 years or more, for a coal plant, the green portion is the fuel cost, essentially. The blue portion is what it costs to build and maintain the plant, the fixed costs that are always there. So of that green circle on top of that I have circled there, that green rectangle on conventional coal, wind could save approximately 1/3 of that versus its full cost, which is over here. For nuclear power, the fuel cost is way, way smaller compared to the cost of building a plant. And for combined cycle and simple cycle gas plants, the capital cost is low compared to the cost of fuel. But still, you're only replacing a portion of the green bar with the full cost of wind. So that's one way to look at its value. Okay, wind electricity drives rates higher, and not just because wind electricity is expensive. So to start with, we have to say, okay, 1 megawatt is not equal to any other 1 megawatt of power. And that's because wind electricity cannot replace fossil fuel burning power plants. And that's just like every member of the workforce, it's not like every other one, right? Some people do very well under stress when the going gets tough, when the needs are greatest. Other people have a harder time being productive at those times. And higher pay is generally associated with dependability and productivity, especially at times when it really matters. So So unfortunately, this picture gets worse. We're required to build and maintain our conventional power plants to prevent summer afternoon blackouts. We're then required to use those plants less throughout the year whenever it's windy, because the state is mandating more and more of this type of electricity. So we build expensive plants, then we build some other plants that we're paying for with our tax dollars that force us to use the plants we already built less. Well, those conventional plants, the coal, natural gas, and nuclear plants, must maintain a reasonable profit despite being used less, right? So in order to cover their fixed costs, while they're selling fewer kilowatt hours per year, those plants have no choice but to go to regulators and try to get their rates increased. And if that doesn't happen at the state level, eventually it will happen at the federal level with the National Electric Reliability Council. So an analogy between dependable power plant costs and household costs, say your job pays $3,500 per month in take-home pay, and your mortgage, taxes, fuel to get to work, food, home upkeep, and other expenses add up to $3,000 per month. Well, hopefully you're saving $500 a month. But then the government requires you to stop working and stop earning whenever it's windy. Whoops. So suddenly you need a raise in hourly pay to meet your fixed expenses. Power plants are just the same way. So, I know it's a simple analogy, but I just want to make sure that we get the point across. So, power plants that work whenever it's windy are not equal to power plants that operate whenever we need them. But wind industry does make us use them less, which reduces our dependable plant's annual income. But since we must keep them open, they have to be paid more per unit of energy that they produce. Bottom line, adding new unreliable power plants that we don't need makes the electricity from our dependable plants more expensive. So we'll turn a little bit to environmental stuff here, which is another angle that the wind industry uses. If cleaner air and a colder planet are important to you, there are far better choices than wind. So I've just put up some comparisons between nuclear power and wind here. The same thing applies for natural gas versus wind, or similar numbers. Nuclear power plants cost about twice per nameplate megawatt what wind plants cost, but every year they generate triple the electricity, so already they're a third cheaper than wind. But at summer peak demand contributions, they have 13 times the dependability value on hot summer afternoons, the nuclear plants do. The lifespan will triple, 60 to 80 years versus 20 to 25. Their lifetime carbon dioxide emissions averted is quadruple that of 1 megawatt of wind energy, nameplate capacity, I'm sorry. And the power density of land is 120 times more compact for nuclear than it is for wind, and that includes mining for the uranium. And I think Kevin will be covering that a little more. The lifetime cost per megawatt day of summer capacity, about 20 times cheaper for nuclear than it is for wind. So in summary, when electricity is high in cost, low in value, and our tax dollars are wasted supporting poor sources of electricity that then drive electricity rates higher for homes and businesses. Other side effects of wind energy laws and rules hurt some innocent members of society, namely rural residential homeowners. And the solution is, don't just vote in November and May. You got to stay in touch with people like Senator Manning and